In the shadowed annals of forgotten epics, where the veil between dominion and despair thins to a whisper, we contemplate the inexorable grind of existence under the weight of unseen chains. Consider the vast machinery of human ambition, oiled by the sweat of the subjugated, turning endlessly in cycles of illusionary mastery. What does it mean to wield power when the very ground beneath trembles with the suppressed tremors of those deemed insignificant? In this meditation, we descend not into tales of triumph or redemption, but into the suffocating depths where authority reveals itself as a fragile delusion, prone to shatter under the patient erosion of resentment. Envision a distant realm, shrouded in perpetual mist, where overlords and their towering citadels decree the fates of multitudes, believing their edicts eternal. These figures, cloaked in robes of false invincibility, orchestrate the rhythms of labor and life, extracting essence from the bent forms below. Yet in the quiet recesses of servitude, a single consciousness awakens to the absurdity of it all, the cosmic indifference that mocks both tyrant and thrall alike. Here, philosophy merges with horror, the realization that all hierarchies are but temporary scaffolds erected against the void, destined to collapse inward upon themselves. The pressure builds imperceptibly, like the gradual accretion of sediment in an ancient seabed, forming strata of unspoken agony. One among the oppressed, a vessel of accumulated shadows, begins to perceive the patterns in the overlord's rituals, their gatherings in opulent halls, where they barter souls as if trading grains of sand. This observer, stripped of name and narrative, embodies the existential plight, existence reduced to utility, yet harboring an inner expanse vaster than the oppressor's domains. The dread seeps in, not through overt violence, but through the relentless awareness that freedom is an illusion for all, master and servant bound in a mutual dance toward oblivion. As ideas spiral deeper, we confront the philosophical core, the human propensity for self-deception, where those in power convince themselves of divine sanction, ignoring the undercurrents of revolt that lap at their foundations. The psychological burden intensifies, a slow constriction around the spirit, as the observer catalogues every gesture of disdain, every decree that consigns lives to drudgery. What terror lies in the knowledge that one's suffering serves no greater purpose, that the universe offers no arbiter to balance the scales. The atmosphere thickens with oppression, a palpable fog that blurs the line between endurance and erosion, where patience morphs into a weapon forged in the fires of futility. Delve further into this abyss. The overlords, in their complacency, fail to sense the shifting sands beneath their thrones. They convene in their sanctums, plotting expansions of control, oblivious to the eyes that track their every vulnerability. The emotional toll mounts, an ocean of unwept tears, dammed by necessity, threatening to breach. Philosophically, this evokes the eternal recurrence of cruelty, a Nietzschean nightmare where the will to power devours itself, revealing the hollowness at its heart. The dread is existential, not merely fear of retribution, but the horror of realizing that all roles, oppressor, oppressed, are interchangeable masks in a theater of absurdity. The build-up spirals inward, ideas evolving from mere observation to a profound interrogation of being. What does it signify to exist as an instrument in another's symphony, only to discover the composer is tone-deaf to harmony? The psychological pressure manifests as an internal labyrinth, where thoughts loop endlessly, each turn deepening the isolation. Tonal shadows lengthen, evoking a ritual of inevitable unraveling, where the oppressed entity's resolve hardens into something crystalline and unyielding, a mirror reflecting back the overlord's own monstrosity. Contemplate the pivot, a moment when suppressed essence erupts, not in chaos, but in calculated symmetry, inverting the pyramid of power. Yet this inversion brings no catharsis, only a darker revelation. The cycle perpetuates, with new forms of subjugation emerging from the ruins. The philosophical undercurrent here is the Sisyphean nature of resistance, one boulder rolled uphill, only for gravity to assert its indifferent pull. Emotional weight presses down, a gravitational force of despair, as the act of defiance exposes the futility of all striving against the entropic flow of existence. In this sermon of shadows, we trace the contours of dread. The overlords, once paragons of unchallenged rule, now confront the void they inflicted upon others. Their gatherings, symbols of solidarity and exploitation, become arenas of exposure, where vulnerabilities laid bare whisper of mortality's approach. Psychologically, the strain is a vice tightening around consciousness, forcing acknowledgement that superiority is a fleeting dream, dissolved by the acid of reality. The atmosphere cloaks everything in a pall of inevitability, a slow march toward dissolution where hope is absent, replaced by the cold calculus of consequence. Spiraling onward, ideas entwine. The essence of horror lies not in the deed, but in the prelude, the years of silent accretion, building toward a climax that alters nothing in the grand indifference. Philosophically, this echoes the Camusian absurd, where rebellion against meaninglessness yields only more profound alienation. The emotional burden is a leaden shroud, enveloping all parties in shared futility, as the oppressed, in mirroring the oppressor's methods, becomes ensnared in the same web of dehumanization. Deeper still, the narrative uncoils into realms of dark introspection. The observer, having internalized the overlord's logic, unleashes it in reverse, yet finds no liberation, only the echo of emptiness. The dread intensifies, a psychic miasma where identities blur, and the line between victim and perpetrator dissolves into existential fog. Tonally, this is a dirge, chanted in measured cadences, each phrase layering upon the last like accumulating dust on forgotten tomes, evoking the oppressive weight of time's inexorable passage. As the spiral tightens, we encounter the core terror, the realization that all power structures are illusions sustained by collective delusion, prone to fracture under the gaze of the truly aware. Psychological pressure culminates in a shattering of self-conception, where overlords glimpse their own insignificance, mirroring the daily annihilation inflicted upon the subjugated. Emotional depths plumb the abyss of regret without resolution, a bottomless well where cries echo unanswered. The atmosphere congeals into something tangible, a viscous ether that slows thought in motion, amplifying the horror of entrapment. Philosophically, this probes the Heideggerian thrownness, beings hurled into roles without choice, grappling with authenticity in a world of false hierarchies. The build-up evolves, ideas morphing from individual suffering to collective doom, a contagion of despair spreading through the fabric of society. In this unending descent, consider the aftermath shadow. The act reverberates, seeding doubt in the foundations of control, yet the void remains unbridged. No evolution toward equity, only mutated forms of dominance emerging from the debris. The dread is perpetual, a background hum of existential unease, reminding that all endeavors against the indifferent cosmos end in silence. Emotional weight bears down unrelentingly, a cumulative force of unassuaged anguish, where personal narratives dissolve into the universal tragedy of being. Psychologically, the strain fractures minds, exposing the fragility of sanity when confronted with life's inherent cruelty. Tonally, the sermon persists in its ritualistic flow, a litany without liturgy, spiraling ever inward toward the heart of nothingness. Further into the vortex, the observer's transformation underscores the philosophical irony. Emancipation through emulation, yet chained anew by the act's moral gravity. The horror resides in this recursion, where liberation begets new bondage ad infinitum. Ideas evolve, branching into meditations on the self's dissolution, where identity erodes under the torrent of enforced roles. The oppressive tone envelopes like a shroud, slow and inexorable, building layers of philosophical inquiry into the nature of suffering as the sole constant. Dread permeates, not as sudden shock, but as gradual immersion in icy depths, where warmth of illusion fades irretrievably. Spiraling relentlessly, we arrive at the precipice. The overlord's downfall illuminates the vanity of all aspirations, a dark mirror reflecting humanity's futile grasp at permanence. Emotional torrents surge without outlet, a reservoir of pain that overflows into eternity. Psychological fissures widen, revealing the abyss within each soul, where no bridge spans the chasm. The atmosphere, heavy with unspoken finality, lingers unresolved, a testament to the unending cycle. In this contemplation, no dawn breaks, no path emerges, only the weighty silence of the void, pressing eternally upon the fragile constructs of existence, in the dim corridors of being, where light itself seems to apologize for its presence. We continue the slow unraveling, not toward any shore, not toward forgiveness or understanding, but deeper into the structure that pretends to hold everything upright. Imagine now a different architecture of domination, not built of stone and timber, but of breath held too long, of glances that never quite meet, of footsteps deliberately softened so as not to disturb the sleeping illusion of order. In this place, the rulers do not sit at long tables issuing commands. They do not need to. Their sovereignty is quieter, more perfect. It lives inside the expectation that tomorrow will resemble today, that the same hands will perform the same motions, that the same voices will remain silent when they are supposed to remain silent. One figure among the ruled begins to notice something obscene in that repetition. Not the cruelty. Cruelty can at least be named, hated, remembered, but the banality of the expectation itself. The way the days are allowed to succeed one another without protest. The way suffering is scheduled like meals. This noticing is already a wound. To see the machinery clearly is to feel the first hairline fracture appear in one's own continuity. The fracture does not scream. It whispers. It whispers that time is not neutral, that each sunrise is complicit, that every unremarkable hour spent carrying out assigned functions is a brick added to a wall whose other side no one is permitted to see. The whisper grows patient. It learns to wait inside gestures so small they appear devotional. The exact angle at which a cup is placed, the precise duration of lowered eyes, the measured rhythm of breathing when someone stands too close. These become a secret liturgy, a counter-ritual performed in the body while the official ritual continues overhead. Philosophy here ceases to console. It becomes forensic. It dissects the premise that existence requires justification. If nothing requires justification, then nothing can be revoked for lack of it. The overlords believe their position is justified by lineage, by wealth, by divine architecture, by the simple fact that no one has yet torn it down. The one who watches knows better. Their position is justified by nothing except momentum. And momentum is not eternal. It only feels eternal while it lasts. The psychological pressure is exquisite in its restraint. It does not arrive as rage. Rage would be loud, visible, containable. Instead, the pressure expresses itself as an increasing precision of attention. Every detail is cataloged without hurry. The way certain voices tighten before giving an order. The precise shade of embarrassment that crosses a face when cruelty is witnessed by someone who is not supposed to witness anything at all. The faint tremor in a hand that signs documents disposing of lives. These are not collected as evidence for a trial that will never occur. They are collected because noticing has become the only remaining form of dignity. Dread settles like fine silt. It does not drown, it coats. Over months, over years, the silt accumulates until movement feels expensive, until even thinking about movement feels like an act of violence against the necessary fiction of permanence. And yet the one who is coded keeps moving, because stopping would be noticed, and to be noticed now would be premature. The atmosphere grows heavier without any single dramatic event to blame. Air seems to acquire mass. Sound arrives muffled, as though filtered through layers of old cloth. Conversations between the ruled become elliptical. Entire paragraphs are conveyed in the pause before a nod, in the choice of which pronoun to avoid. Meanwhile, the rulers speak with increasing abstraction, as though the things they command no longer require names. The asset pool, throughput efficiency, replacement cycles. Language itself begins to function as a distancing mechanism, a way of never having to touch what is being handled. Then comes the moment, not dramatic, not accompanied by thunder, when observation completes its transformation into verdict. The verdict is not moral. Morality still belongs to the world of justification, and justification has already been ruled irrelevant. The verdict is colder, more structural. This arrangement is no longer geometrically stable. A load-bearing illusion has fatigued. Something must give way, not because it is right, not because it is just, simply because physics, given enough time, eventually notices bad engineering. What follows is not chaos. Chaos would imply release. What follows is choreography. The choreography is slow, almost courteous. Doors are locked with the same soft click used to open them. Lights are dimmed to the precise level that flatters important portraits on the wall. Furniture is rearranged with geometric care, creating sight lines that did not exist before. Conversations are held in tones so ordinary they could be about weather. And through it all, the pressure never spikes into hysteria. It simply redistributes. One by one, the architects of the arrangement are invited, always politely, to experience the view from underneath the structure they designed. Not as punishment. Punishment still implies a moral economy. This is something stranger, a demonstration of symmetry. The same gravity that pinned others now pins them. The same arithmetic of hours, minutes, breaths. The same realization that no one is coming. They do not beg at first. Begging would require acknowledging that language still matters. They issue instructions instead. Orders. Reminders of who they are, whom they know, what consequences usually follow disobedience. The instructions grow quieter as the hours stretch. Eventually they become questions. Eventually the questions stop expecting answers. The one who arranged the demonstration does not gloat. Gloating would imply victory, and victory is a category that only makes sense inside the world being dismantled. Instead, there's only a calm, ceremonial attendance, a witnessing, a refusal to look away while the structure sighs and settles into its new, terminal orientation. When it is finished, nothing is cleansed, no balance restored, no lesson taught to history. The architecture simply lies differently now, still oppressive, still indifferent, merely rearranged so that a different set of lungs must labor to inflate the same fiction. Outside, the sun will arrive on schedule. Birds will perform their meaningless canticles. Somewhere a ledger will be opened, and a line will be drawn through names that no longer answer. The machinery will stutter, recalibrate, resume. New voices will learn the necessary inflections. New silences will be practiced until they sound natural. And somewhere, in the silted chambers of another mind, the same slow noticing will begin again. Not because anything was solved, only because noticing, once begun, has no graceful way to stop that in the muted cadence of recurrence. Where each breath mimics the last without innovation or mercy, we persist in the examination of fractures that refuse to heal. Not because healing is possible, such notions belong to narratives we have already discarded, but because the act of probing reveals deeper fissures, veins of emptiness threading through what was mistaken for solidity. Picture a landscape not of earth and sky, but of routines etched into the ether, where figures move in prescribed orbits, their paths worn smooth by the friction of obligation. The overseers in this tableau do not brandish whips or decrees. Their authority manifests in the subtle calibration of expectations, the way a glance can recalibrate an entire existence without a word exchanged. They inhabit the assumption that obedience is the default state of being, a gravitational constant pulling all toward compliance. Yet within this orbit, a solitary awareness orbits counter, tracing ellipses that grow ever more eccentric, brushing against the boundaries of the permissible without collision. Yet, this awareness does not rebel in the conventional sense. Rebellion implies opposition, a binary that still honors the structure it opposes. Instead, it insinuates, like moisture seeping into mortar, exploiting the porosity inherent in all constructs. The horror unfolds not in the seepage itself, but in the dawning recognition that every edifice, no matter how imposing, is riddled with such vulnerabilities, spaces where the material gives way to void. Philosophically, this probes the illusion of permanence. What if the pillars upholding reality are not stone, but supposition? What if the weight they bear is only sustained by collective forgetfulness? The psychological constriction intensifies through this lens, a gradual narrowing of perceptual horizons until the world contracts to the dimensions of a single, unending scrutiny. Details accumulate like debts unpaid. The faint asymmetry in a superior's posture during moments of command, the microscopic hesitation before enforcing a rule, the echo of footsteps that betray a hidden weariness. These are not weapons, not yet. They are merely observations, but observations that accrue mass, bending the observer's inner space until it warps under the load. Dread here is atmospheric, a pressure gradient that draws one inexorably toward the low point, where gravity pools and stagnation reigns. As the spiral deepens, ideas evolve into interrogations of agency or its absence. Who authors the script when all players recite lines scripted by inertia? The overseers, convinced of their authorship, fail to perceive the script's fragility, how a single misplaced comma could unravel the syntax of control. The one who perceives this lives in a perpetual state of suspended cataclysm, aware that disruption need not be deliberate. It can emerge from the mere act of seeing too clearly. Emotional density thickens, a sediment of unarticulated loss. For what is lost is not freedom, but the comforting veil that once obscured its impossibility. Tonally, the descent maintains its liturgical poise, each phrase an invocation without deity, summoning only the specter of inexorability. The build-up coils tighter, thoughts branching into considerations of replication. How patterns of dominance imprint themselves not just on bodies but on psyches, ensuring that even in absence the template endures. The observer, imprinted thus, becomes both archive and architect, preserving the flaws while plotting their exploitation. Not for escape, but for the grim satisfaction of witnessing the template's failure. Delving onward, we encounter the existential marrow, the horror of interdependence, where oppressor and oppressed are yoked in a symbiotic decay, each sustaining the other's delusion. To dismantle one is to expose the rot in both, revealing that autonomy was always a myth, a story told to mask the mutual parasitism. Pressure mounts as this truth permeates, eroding the boundaries of self until identity dissolves into a collective miasma of shared futility. No surge of empowerment follows, only the heavier burden of knowing that all acts, defiant or compliant, feed the same entropic engine. The atmosphere congeals further, a viscous medium where motion requires Herculean effort, amplifying the terror of inertia's grip. Ideas spiral into meditations on temporality's cruelty, the way time dilates in servitude, stretching moments of awareness into eternities, while compressing the overseer's complacency into blind perpetuity. Emotional weight accrues relentlessly, a cumulative gravity that pins without pinning, suffocating through implication rather than force. In this unending liturgy, contemplate the threshold crossed without fanfare, when insinuation solidifies into intervention, subtle as a shift in shadow. The choreography refines itself, gestures refined to the point of invisibility, a door left fractionally ajar, a document misplaced by millimeters, a conversation overheard and rerouted through silence. The overseers sensed the perturbation obliquely, attributing it to fatigue or coincidence, unaware that coincidence is merely the mask worn by inevitability. Their responses, tightened protocols, heightened vigilance, only accelerate the warp, introducing new stresses into the already fatigued framework. Psychologically, the strain manifests as a fractal anxiety, where each level of magnification reveals finer cracks, mirroring the observer's internal labyrinth. Dread evolves from personal to pervasive, infecting the air like spores, germinating in unguarded minds. Philosophically, this evokes the void's democracy. No hierarchy escapes entropy. All succumb equally to the slow unraveling, the patient dissolution that mocks ambition and endurance alike. Spiraling inexorably, we probe the core vacancy, the realization that meaning, if it exists, resides not in action or outcome, but in the interstitial spaces between, the pauses where possibility flickers and dies unremarked. The observer, custodian of these spaces, wields no power beyond attestation, bearing witness to the structure's quiet suicide. Emotional torrents subside into a stagnant pool, reflective but depthless, offering no insight beyond the reflection of one's own hollow gaze. The tonal shroud envelopes tighter, a sermon whispered in echoes, building layers upon layers of introspective horror without crest or trough. Ideas mutate, from structural critique to ontological despair. What remains when the architecture crumbles? Not liberation, but exposure to the raw indifference of existence, unbuffered by illusion. Deeper into the coil, the intervention culminates not in collapse, but in reconfiguration, a subtle realignment where roles invert imperceptibly, the overseers now navigating orbits they once dictated, their commands echoing hollow in the reordered void. Yet this inversion brings no reversal. It merely perpetuates the cycle under new guises, the observer now ensnared in the web of their own design. Psychological fissures propagate, splintering consciousness into shards that reflect distorted facets of the same unyielding truth. Dread permeates as a constant undertow, pulling toward abyssal depths where resolution is anathema. The atmosphere, laden with unspoken finality, resists dissipation, clinging like humidity to skin. In this perpetual unwind, ideas entwine with the philosophical specter of recurrence eternal, each dismantling seeding the next erection, ad infinitum, a Sisyphean loop without the mercy of amnesia. Emotional burden solidifies into an immutable core, heavy with the aggregate of unalleviated anguish. The ritual persists, unyielding, spiraling toward horizons that recede eternally, leaving only the oppressive certainty that every end is but a prelude to further descent. Unresolved, unrelenting, unrepentant, in the shadowed interstices of recurrence, where echoes masquerade as origins, we linger upon the inexhaustible theme of entrapment without egress. Not entrapment by visible bonds. Such would be too merciful, too tangible, but by the insidious weave of habitual perception, where the mind's eye acclimates to its own dimming until darkness feels like home. Envision a domain suspended in perpetual twilight, neither day nor night, where custodians of order patrol not with vigilance, but with the somnambulance of certainty, their footsteps tracing grooves worn deep by unchallenged precedent. They administer not through force, but through the curation of normalcy, a curated void where deviation registers not as threat, but as anomaly to be smoothed away like a crease in fabric. Amid this curation, a solitary cognizance stirs, not with the fire of indignation, but with the chill of clarity. The recognition that normalcy is the most exquisite cage, its bars forged from the alloy of acquiescence and amnesia. This cognizance does not clamor for release. Such clamor would affirm the cage's reality. Instead, it inhabits the intervals, the breaths between mandates, the silences punctuating edicts, the microseconds where oversight lapses. Horror resides here in the philosophical dissection of consent. What if subjugation thrives not on coercion, but on the tacit agreement to perceive no alternative? The custodians, blind to their own scripting, perpetuate the illusion of inevitability, their rituals a liturgy of repetition that numbs the spirit into compliance. Yet the one who inhabits the intervals perceives the script's seams, the places where the narrative frays under the weight of its own redundancy. Psychological compression manifests as an internal vice, tightening imperceptibly with each cycle of observance. Details proliferate like invasive roots. The subtle variance in tonal inflection during pronouncements of policy, the microscopic dilation of pupils when authority is asserted over the inconsequential, the faint echo of doubt in pauses that stretch a fraction too long. These accretions form a subterranean map, not of escape routes, but of structural infirmities, points where the edifice of control leans too heavily on unexamined assumptions. Dread coalesces not as panic, but as a pervasive humidity, saturating consciousness until every thought drips with the inevitability of corrosion. As the coil winds inward, ideas transmute into explorations of complicity's architecture. How the ruled and rulers interlock in a mutual scaffold, each beam reliant on the other's stability, yet riddled with termite-like voids of unspoken resentment. The cognizance, mapping these voids, embodies the existential terror of awareness without agency. The knowledge that to illuminate the flaws is to risk the collapse, yet to remain silent is to endorse the decay. Emotional strata deepen, layers of unvoiced lament compressing into a dense core, where the weight of complicity presses heavier than any external yoke. Tonally, the invocation sustains its measured incantation, each clause a deliberate step downward, building strata of introspective abyss without rush or respite. The progression spirals into contemplations of temporality's deceit. Time, that impartial arbiter, feigns linearity while looping in concealed circuits, ensuring that today's obedience seeds tomorrow's deeper entrenchment. The custodians ensconced in their temporal delusion mistake endurance for eternity, oblivious to the cognizance's patient chronometry, measuring not hours, but the erosion of resolve. Plunging further, we confront the marrow of interdependence's horror, the realization that isolation is illusion, that every entity is enmeshed in a web where vibrations from one strand reverberate through all, amplifying fragility rather than strength. To tug at a single thread is to invite the unraveling, yet inaction invites the web's tightening embrace. Pressure intensifies as this web constricts the psyche, fracturing self-perception into prismatic shards, each reflecting a distorted facet of shared culpability. No cathartic fracture ensues, only the heavier pall of knowing that all connections bind in service to dissolution. The atmosphere thickens to opacity, a fog where forms blur and intentions dissolve, heightening the terror of navigation without landmarks. Ideas evolve, branching into ontological voids. What substance remains when the scaffolding of roles strips away, revealing not essence, but absence? The cognizance, stripped thus, floats in this absence, a sentinel without purpose, bearing witness to the custodian's unwitting self-sabotage, their edicts echoing hollower with each iteration. In this ceaseless liturgy, ponder the liminal pivot, when habitation of intervals coalesces in a subtle subversion, gestures so infinitesimal they evade detection, an inflection modulated, a sequence inverted by degrees, a silence prolonged just enough to unsettle equilibrium. The custodians register the disequilibrium vaguely, ascribing it to ephemeral malaise, unaware that malaise is the harbinger of systemic fatigue. Their countermeasures, refinements to protocol, amplifications of oversight, merely redistribute the strain, introducing novel fissures into the once seamless weave. Psychologically, the burden fractals outward, splintering into cascades of anticipatory unease, where each potential ripple forecasts tidal dissolution. Dread permeates as an undercurrent, eroding foundations while surfaces remain placid. Philosophically, this mirrors the absurd's embrace. Existence as a perpetual rehearsal for a performance that never commences, roles rehearsed to exhaustion without audience or applause. Spiraling relentlessly, we delve into the nucleus of vacancy, the epiphany that purpose, if ascribed, serves only to veneer the void, a cosmetic over cosmic indifference. The cognizance, custodian of this epiphany, wields it not as tool, but as mirror, reflecting back the custodian's hollow core. Their authority, an echo chamber resounding with emptiness. Emotional reservoirs overflow without drainage, a deluge of unmitigated desolation submerging all in its wake. The tonal mantle cloaks denser, a dirge intoned in whispers, layering existential strata without apex or nadir. Ideas mutate from architectural autopsy to metaphysical entropy. All constructs, born of intent, succumb to diffusion, their coherence a transient anomaly in the flux of non-being. Deeper into the vortex, the subversion culminates in reconfiguration's whisper, a realignment so gradual it masquerades as stasis. Custodians now ensnared in orbits they once orchestrated, their edicts reverberating as futile incantations in the reordered ether. Yet this whisper brings no inversion's thrill. It perpetuates the weave under veiled forms, the cognizance now threaded into the fabric it sought to fray. Psychological schisms proliferate, consciousness splintering into abyssal reflections, each shard a testament to unrelieved torment. Dread solidifies as bedrock, unyielding and omnipresent, anchoring all in its gravitational maw. The atmosphere, saturated with unresolved tension, resists any whisper of release, clinging eternally. In this infinite unwind, ideas interlace with the specter of eternal recursion, each reconfiguration birthing nascent scaffolds, doomed to the same inexorable fade, a loop devoid of mercy or memory. Emotional gravity condenses into singularity, an inexhaustible well of anguish without horizon. The ritual endures, unremitting, coiling toward vistas that eternally elude, bequeathing only the burdensome assurance that every reconfiguration is prelude to further submergence. Unresolved, unyielding, unending. Thanks for watching the video. For watching more videos like this, visit my channel and subscribe it.